Make sure you look into these receivers before it's too late. Week 4 wide receiver additions up next. Starting in Phoenix, Arizona, we're going to talk about Christian Kirk with the Arizona Cardinals. He's obviously the third cog in the machine. We'll talk about that a little bit later, but right now, despite the fact being the third cog in the machine, he's been absolutely phenomenal to start the season. 2 touchdowns in week 1, took a little bit of a step back in week 2, but still was a guy that you could utilize. Week 3 came back with a vengeance, over 100 yards on 6 receptions. He's been great despite the fact being the third cog in this machine. You talk about a guy, 17 targets, 15 receptions, absolutely efficient, 239 yards and 2 touchdowns through 3 games, absolutely on pace right now for a 1,000-yard season. Obviously, we're talking about a guy that could easily get himself 8 to 10 touchdowns in this offense if Kyler Murray continues to look phenomenal moving forward in this season. He definitely looks like a guy that's taking that third-year leap. He's been absolutely amazing so far to start the season, and he hasn't even been running the ball. He's been doing this as a passing quarterback. And Christian Kirk taking a big step forward in his third season. This is a guy that if you go and look at his first season and his second season, he's had moments, but he hasn't been consistent. And so far, to start this season, almost a quarter of the way through, this has been one of the most consistent receivers in Arizona. Now, he's running 38.3 routes a game. You contrast that to 60 routes for DeAndre Hopkins, 53 routes for A.J. Green, and then last week's waiver wonder, Rondell Moore at 23.7. So he's obviously the third cog in this machine, but when he's out there, he's being utilized, he's efficient, and he's making plays. This isn't just like Rondell Moore's like 70-yard reception, nobody's around him, and he just gets the easy big play. Christian Kirk is going out there and he's balling. And now, granted, we have to wonder what's going to happen. DeAndre Hopkins out there for 60 snaps a game. Is he taking a little bit of step back because of that rib injury? Probably. But we saw that probably the biggest beneficiary last week was A.J. Green finally came through with a big game. But Christian Kirk has steadily been there making plays every single week. And he's a guy that I consider still being a flex, a wide receiver 3 moving forward until further notice. If we start seeing this Arizona Cardinals passing game take a step back, then obviously we can reevaluate that situation. But right now, the way Christian Kirk is performing early on in this season, he is right now a good flex and a solid wide receiver 3 at this point in time. That's where he is in the standings, depending on what type of league you're playing in. This is a guy in standard. I like what he's bringing for sure. In standard, you're not worried about receptions, and that's the one thing in PPR. He's not like a reception monster, but he's making big plays with his receptions. I think Christian Kirk at 22.4% ESPN rostered needs to go up. That needs to go up. This guy needs to be at least in the 80% rostered range. It blows my mind right now going into week 4 that he's only at 22.4% rostered. Moving on, Tim Patrick, 14% rostered in ESPN leagues, coming off one of the biggest games of his career. This guy having to take a step up. Jerry Jeudy out still another month. Right? He's only been out 2 games now. He's going to be out another month at least. Tim Patrick taking a step up, eating some of those targets. And guess what? Now KJ Hamler with a torn ACL out for the season. Tim Patrick and Cortland Sutton are your only 2 reliable receivers in this offense outside of a guy like Noah Fant or Albert Okwuegbunam. What are we talking about? We're talking about Tim Patrick actually having that ability to take his game to the next level. We saw that last week. And, we look at a Baltimore defense that is banged up, that he will be able to make plays against, and a guy that right now, 13 targets, not quite efficient enough there, but that's going to go up with the injuries at the wide receiver position in Denver. 12 receptions on those 13 targets. Once again, an extremely efficient receiver with his opportunities. Been that way his entire career. 174 yards, 2 touchdowns. He's running 49.3 routes per game, and that is just skyrocketed now with Judy out, with Hamler out. And you think about that and you compare it to Sutton's 52.3. He's going to be out there basically just as much as Sutton. He's going to have just as much of an opportunity. He's going to be a big part of this passing game. Right now, Teddy Bridgewater, much better than anticipated to start this season. I don't think Baltimore is this vaunted defense that it was last year, once again, due to a lot of injuries that this team has sustained early on in the year. This very well could be a shootout next week. Tim Patrick might be a decent flex play. I mean, but at 14% rostered, a guy that probably definitely should be up in that 50 to 60% range, at least, when you talk about a guy that's getting opportunity. And that's what we're talking about in fantasy. We're not talking about a guy that you're just going to plug and play in your offense. You need guys on your bench that you can plug and play depending on the situation. They're not guys that are supposed to be playing every week. And Tim Patrick is a great guy to have on your bench and pick the right weeks to play. Running 49.3 routes, that number's going to go up. He's going to get more opportunities than his 13 targets in 3 games. That number is going to go up. I imagine he'll settle in right around that precipice that I like, around 6 targets a game. And he'll be a guy that in a pinch you can use in your flex. We need those guys. Go get those guys right now. You're thinking, oh man, but he's not going to help my team right now. Well, he might. 1, he might help your team right now. And 2, you're going to have bye weeks coming up. You're going to have guys get injured. You need depth on that bench. Tim Patrick is great depth for your bench. Moving on, Bryan Edwards, 13.8% rostered in ESPN leagues, playing for the Las Vegas Raiders. Fucking hate the Raiders, by the way. Fuck you, Raiders. Fuck the Raiders. They're really good, though. Derek Carr, really playing out of his mind right now. Let's see if he can keep this up throughout the season. But if he can, a guy like Bryan Edwards reminds me right now of the role of Nelson Agholor early on last year, except he's doing better than Agholor did early on last year for the Raiders. And I see his role growing throughout the season. Right now, he has been Mr. Clutch for this offense. He hasn't been getting a lot of targets early in the game, but when you talk about fourth quarter and overtime, he has been there making plays for this offense. I think he's had like 2 missed opportunities on touchdowns so far early in this season. He's a guy that right now I would love to have on my roster, except in my main league. My boy Brett, he's got him on his roster. You know, told him about that a little earlier in the season. Kind of regretting that right now. But Bryan Edwards, 13.8% rostered, 13 targets on the season, 10 receptions. You know, I got 210 yards through 3 weeks. He has a great opportunity right now in his minuscule role. He's got a great opportunity to make it to 1,000 yards. We've been missing out on those touchdowns, but they are going to come. And this is a guy that right now is a beat the waiver wire guy, because you want him on your roster before he starts popping. You know, I think you're going to have more trust in Bryan Edwards moving forward than you ever did with Nelson Agholor last year in this offense. This offense looks like it's taking a step forward in the passing game, understanding we don't have a good offensive line. We don't have a strong running game unless we're playing a weak defense against the run. And we need to rely on our better talent on that side of the ball. And that right now is our quarterback and our wide receivers and our fucking badass tight end. Bryan Edwards, a big part of that. Currently, dude's on the field more than Ruggs. He's running 56.3 snaps. He's on the field more than Hunter Renfrow, and that guy's coming up next. And he is out there running routes, almost every play. Like I said, just missed out on a couple touchdowns. He is out there making big plays, stretching the field. Kind of like Ruggs. He's going to get going. This is a great beat the waiver wire guy. If you have a spot on the end of your bench, I think if you add him, you'll be happy later. Next guy, Hunter Renfrow. We're staying in Vegas. 11.3% rostered in ESPN leagues. 22 targets so far to start the season. 16 receptions. 204 yards. So he's right there with Bryan Edwards in yardage, except he's up on the receptions and targets, right? But the one thing we're worried about is his routes run. He's out there 39.7 in comparison to Bryan Edwards, 56.3. It's quite a bit different in routes run. But when he's out there, Derek Carr's been utilizing him. He trusts him. He trusts him to move the chains. He trusts him to get in the end zone. They utilize this guy. Another guy. They could have 3,000-yard receivers, one at tight end and two at wide receiver for all I know. Like, Derek Carr right now is averaging 400 yards a game, guys. This is not a bad offense to buy into, and buy into really cheap when you're talking about a guy in Bryan Edwards or at this point, Hunter Renfrow. And to me, Renfrow, why he's after Edwards, a little less sexy. He's not quite as sexy, but you know what? Honestly, in PPR, sometimes sexy's not what get it done. Sometimes it's that slick little slot receiver like Hunter Renfrow, who's out there 22 targets through 3 weeks. Not bad target share. Getting utilized. And he's out there in 89% of leagues. Are you fucking kidding me? No respect for fucking Hunter Renfrow. Now, moving on. This guy a little bit more owned. Sammy Watkins, 31.8% rostered in ESPN leagues. Another guy, 22 targets, 12 receptions, 208 yards. He's being utilized a little bit farther down the field. Lamar Jackson right now is throwing the ball down the field more than anybody else, and that includes Patrick Mahomes. And Sammy Watkins is a part of that. Now, Watkins hasn't been blowing the doors off, but another guy who has a great opportunity at 1,000 yards. He's already at 208 on the season. And he's running the most snaps for wide receivers for the Ravens. And you're talking a guy who's averaging 57.3 snaps, 15 more than Brown had in week 2. And that's where the snap level really got bumped. And so you're talking about a guy that was out there for 15 more snaps in week 2 than Marquise Brown. Now, I know Marquise Brown was the guy that made the plays and currently is the guy that has been more of a playmaker if you take away fucking week 3, fucking son of a bitch. But Sammy Watkins is a guy that could get going. Now, what am I worried about with Watkins? Well, obviously, Mark Andrews out there running a ton of fucking routes. Finally got going week 3. Marquise Brown, I'm hoping week 3 and those easy touchdown drops were aberrations, and you're talking about the best playmaker right now in that offense. And so he could be number 3 in the pecking order. And then when you think about the guy who is coming back from IR, possibly in week 4 or week 5, maybe even week 6, we don't know yet, but coming back to practice this week in Rashad Bateman, the next guy, 7.1% rostered, 27th overall selection in the 2021 draft, and was absolute buzz in training camp until he had his groin injury. He has the ability to have a huge breakout rookie season, and that honestly can go as far as Lamar Jackson goes. And what I saw on Sunday, you might look at the completion percentage and go, whoa, wow, Lamar Jackson wasn't on. He was fucking on, dude. That guy's slinging the ball down the field more accurately than I ever have seen him sling it downfield. It looks good. It's a catchable ball. Fucking receivers just aren't bringing him in. Now, Mark Andrews, that one was a little high for Andrews, but better high than too low. Don't want those INTs. Now, granted, he is throwing some INTs, but he's also throwing down the field at an unprecedented level. Rashad Bateman supposed to be this big, fast, huge, go up there and get the fucking ball guy. And he could be the missing piece for this offense in this passing game. And if that's the case, I could see it being, hey, Sammy Watkins takes the back seat to Marquise Brown, who looks to be the superior playmaker and already the best target in the offense in Mark Andrews. So that's the worry about Sammy Watkins. But right now, when you look at, he's running the most routes for the Ravens. I like him as an ad. Rashad Bateman beat the waiver wire. If you got an IR spot, you can add him, get him on your roster, stick him in the IR spot, and then you can get another guy on the roster. You can get Sammy Watkins on your roster. You get Hunter Renfrow, any of these guys, and you can double down on this week's ads and figure out the rest later. Finally, a few guys that either might be out there or just keep your eye on. First off, James Washington, around 66 routes for the Steelers with Juju Smith-Schuster and Deontay Johnson out. You want to keep an eye on those guys. If they're going to be out in deeper leagues, James Washington could be in play if Johnson and Juju aren't able to go this week. Kendrick Bourne in a negative game script ran 55 routes in week 3. After he was running 32.5 routes the first 2 weeks, so that was a big bump. So Kendrick Bourne could be a guy that you can add and use as a negative game script. So you think the New England Patriots are going to be in a negative game script, kind of like this week against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers? You fucking think that Tampa Bay is going to lay some points down this week? Probably. Could be a negative game script, which could be a great week to play a guy like Kendrick Bourne, who is fucking basically virtually free out there. Or a guy, you could go out there and see if a guy like Jacoby Myers, 67.5% owned in ESPN leagues, is out there and available. He is going to be huge. These guys also, you got to think about the fact James White out right now, injured. The wide receivers are probably going to be more utilized. And Jacoby Myers right now is top three in the league when you talk about routes run. Top 3 in the league when you talk about routes run. 67.5% owned. He's in a negative game script situation against Tampa Bay. We have seen Tampa Bay secondary has holes. Everybody was thinking this defense was going to be lights out. They played lights out in the playoffs, but this defense gave up over 22 points a game last year. This defense has holes this year. And guess what? Jacoby Myers and Kendrick Bourne could be decent plays in your flex heading into week 4. These are guys that are totally available out there. I'd like to thank you for watching. If you liked what you saw, make sure you like, share, and subscribe to the channel. I'll be joining Football Sunday with Mike Lynch and Rashad Taylor on Sunday morning. We'll be on 1080 The Fan here in Portland, Oregon. We'll be doing the Fantasy Scramble. That happens at 9:30 a.m. Pacific time. You can text in your start-sit questions on Sunday morning to 503-250-1080. We'll answer them as a little panel there, and you can listen at the Audacity link that I'll have down below. Once again, thank you for listening and watching, and make sure you keep your eye out for the videos on running backs ads coming up next.